And welcome to the Specialty Matcha Podcast. My name is Ryan. This is my co-host Zongjun, who also goes by Sam,
Hello, hello.
and we're the co-founders of Senko Matcha Products.
Yeah, we launched this podcast to discuss our learning journey in matcha, share startup stories, and interview experts.
Hello, Ryan from the future here. You may have noticed that we have not started season 5 with our Uji Matcha piece yet. Partially because we had breaking news regarding the GI and we wanted to get that out. And this recording is about the tea picking we did in Toyota Aichi, which we thought was better to be released just after harvest season. We are going to start releasing the Uji Matcha research piece over on our Substack. If you haven't seen that yet, I'll link it in the show notes, where you can start reading. It's in 5 different parts. And pretty soon we will launch that series here on the podcast feed. All right. Thanks for listening. Back to the episode. And we are in Toyota Aichi,
Yeah.
a town I didn't even know existed until about a year ago.
but I guess we do know because it's Toyota, Ryan.
Yeah, Toyota, true. That's a factory town.
Yeah. It's actually has direct linkage with the car Toyota brand.
Yes, it does. And it turns out that it used to have a lot of tea fields, we've learned. And as the manufacturing exploded, I think about 70 years ago is when it really started to hype up.
Mhm.
Toyota was buying a bunch of these different factories. Or Toyota was buying up a bunch of these tea farms to reclaim that land to move to manufacturing. So now there's actually not that many places that grow tea that are grown tencha here.
Yeah, there used to be a few hundred tea farmers in this region.
And now they're just a small handful.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like a lot of these cars were built on once was tea bushes.
Yeah, so if you're driving in a Toyota or listening to this in a Toyota, it actually overtook some tea fields here in Aichi Prefecture.
Yeah, shame on you.
But it had some secondary implications too. We learned is that with that local manufacturing scale up, it needed workers. And what's interesting about tea and tea work is that it's very seasonal. You
Mm.
need someone to show up and pick tea from 6 in the morning until 5 at night, but they're only doing that for 3 weeks. So you need someone that not only skilled to do it, that wants to do it, that's willing to do it for the money that it pays,
And has the time to do it.
and has the time to do it in only a certain window of time. And a lot of these manufacturing jobs really sucked all of the oxygen out of the room when it came to the local labor supply. So it has historically been so it has historically even been difficult to find labor to pick tea if you're doing any hand picking for Tizumi Tencha. Yeah, but
Until very recently. We're talking about Toyota building cars. This is modern history.
50 years history.
I think I wrote it somewhere.
So there's a couple interesting and unique things about this region here in Aichi. And I think it expands into Nishio as well, the other really famous tea producing region, is that they have local quarries where the stone, they have really nice type of soft granite that's used to make ishiusu. And apparently the one main quarry where most of these ishiusus are made ran out. And there
Mm,
was a big stockpile of it, and apparently they've almost worked through all of that stockpile. So this
yeah.
very specific type of local stone that everyone's using for stone milling here is in very, very short supply.
This is like Yixing clay a little bit.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like Yixing clay,
But
actually.
yeah, it has a really nice cold, smooth texture. Like a
Color.
bluish hue.
Yeah, the color of the stone looks a little different than the ones we've seen in Kyoto or in
Mm,
Yame. So it's really unique and interesting to learn about. The producer that we met here was saying that even getting medate or the refinishing of those stones for him takes upwards of 6 months.
mm.
So for him, he rotates them out every 3 to 4 years and has them resharpened. That's a 3 to 6 month process, and that's a and that's a 6 month process. And part of what they do when they know that the stone needs to be replaced, this is kind of obvious, but it was less obvious to us before we started asking some questions, is the degree of undulation. So it's really unique about a stone mill or an ishiusu is that there's a wood post, and the top stone is rotating around that wood post. And there always has to be some space between the post and the other inner wall of the Ishiuzu, because that's exactly where the tencha is going in to feed the machine. But as you can imagine, you have all of this granite and spinning, spinning, spinning. you're going to wear down that wood over time. And the more you wear down that wood, the more that space increases and it will undulate more because the top stone isn't just rotating, it's technically undulating around, it's orbiting around the post. So those also get replaced every 3 to 4 years. And one of the ways that you can identify that stone requires medate is if its degree of undulation is very, very high. So it's actually not necessarily a good thing. Apparently, it doesn't affect quality too much. We didn't get a very definitive answer when we were asking about quality differences as it continues to go, but that was pretty interesting to learn.
So Ryan, it's a little bit crazy that we are in season 5 now. And after being to so many places, and actually seeing so many tencha farming and tencha facilities, tencha gardens, this is actually our first time seeing a tencha factory in action.
In action. We've seen tencha processing equipment in a bunch of places, but we've never actually seen it being
Moving.
used. We haven't seen it moving, and that was quite the experience.
Yeah.
And that room was incredibly hot. Free sauna. It was like a sauna and steam room combined.
Yeah. Very
They
good for my skin.
very good for everyone's skin. Well, everyone was drenched who was looking at it earlier today because they both steam and in the same room where they have the tencha oven, and it's
Mm.
a radiant style tencha oven using red bricks.
But the excitement was incredibly real. And seeing all of these machine moving, seeing all the steams coming out from the machine, seeing all of these butterfly net and all of these tea leaves flying, there was something magical about it. And that was very cool. So Ryan, why don't you share to our audience like why are we here in the first place?
Yeah, we were very grateful. We're joining the trip that Koto Tea Space, Kun Pop and Yusuke-san have organized. They're a tea house and tea brand in Bangkok, Thailand, and we've met with them on and off, and they were really kind earlier this year to invite us on their trip to meet Suji-san. And they were like, hey, we're going to Aichi too. We're going to go pick tea for 3 days. We set up this arrangement, which is an exchange with a local tencha farmer here because there's a lot of labor shortage problems. So they kind of negotiated, or maybe negotiate's too businessy of a term. They talked with him to make an exchange that we'll pick tea here in Toyota Aichi, and in exchange we get some free education, so some behind the scenes access and look to understand what the process is going on. So there's a really international group here. It's a really fun group, a mixture of Thai people, some people from Laos, Indonesia, us, and Belgium. And English is sort of the lingua franca of the group. And
And a very large age gap.
yeah, where the youngest person I think is 19 years old, and then it goes all the way up. So it's in a really like interesting group. But we all share this thing in common. We love
Yeah, the
tea.
same passion.
We love
Uh,
matcha, we love tea, and everyone loves other types of tea too. There's a lot of gongfu cha drinkers here.
uh,
Everyone's really willing to like carve out, their free time, probably some or some holiday time to come pick tea, which is literally backbreaking labor for 3 days to really get an immersive experience end to end. They literally are doing everything from like smelling the fertilizer in the ground as we're picking tea and like all that musty smell that you get in a tea garden, all the way through enjoying a bowl of matcha and seeing every single process end to end. So,
circle.
full circle. And we're really grateful for this invitation. Actually, we're quite tired, and we're recording this at the end of the day. If our voice doesn't sound as enthusiastic as it should be, it's because my back really hurts. I can feel every single muscle in my back. But it's been great fun and so much positive energy. They did a really wonderful job curating a nice group of people. Just we were picking tea for 5 hours after lunch today, and just so much chit chats, karaoke.
In the tea field.
In the tea field. I hope we weren't bothering the grandmas and grandpas around us, the Japanese grandma and grandpas around us picking tea.
I think they were all secretly enjoying.
Probably like sneaking a smile under their breath as people were screaming "Ruby-chan" for like the 20th time.
Hi!
It was really lovely spirit in the air.
But like this tea picking session, I think it's a little bit different than our other experience in the way that I think we really end up helping them. Like instead of like adding more, energy or attention to the farmers to like kind of quote unquote educate us or taking care of us.
Yeah, we're still like 20 people
Mm,
in total, including Kun Pop and Yusuke-san, and they also brought their staff with them as well. And
mm,
huge props to them for bringing their staff here and doing this and seeing everything firsthand. That's one of the most unusual things about Koto Tea Space is you can walk in and no matter who you talk to, like they are actually an expert and they've actually been to the places
mm,
where they're sourcing their tea from and like have such deep knowledge, which makes it a really unique experience. And that's most people's first exposure, and they've gotten people into tea
mm,
through that. Like
mm,
you go, you sit down, you have a bowl of sencha, or you have a pot of sencha or gokuro, or order a matcha, and then you just learn more. It's like these access points to go down the rabbit hole. But if you're talking to someone who's just like telling you how it's a secret mythical herb versus like the nitty gritty of the agriculture, right? You select for a really interesting group of people.
mm.
And I think that really reflected in the community that they've cultivated for people who are willing to spend the money to come out here and the time
And the time.
to come and do this. So it's been really cool. So there's a couple unique things about Toyota and Aichi specifically, that I think are worth mentioning before we start digging into some of the details that we've learned. And we've learned a lot. And we're really grateful for Yusuke-san for all the translation work that he's been doing, so we can basically have a dialogue with the farmer directly. So one of the things is that there's a lot of local oil pressing. And the reason that that matters is canola oils or rapeseed oil makes fantastic fertilizer. It's really amino acid rich, especially when applied before harvest.
And in modern days, all of these rapeseed oils are kind of removed through a chemical process. So the leftover kind of like do not have anything, valuable. But in Toyota Aichi, they're still using this traditional oil pressing mechanism, which the residual of the oil pressed content is still incredibly nutritionally rich. So
Free of chemicals.
and, and free of chemicals. So people are using it, as wonderful fertilizer for the tea.
And similar story with the Hanzu shading. I don't believe there's any Hanzu rice straw shading here in Aichi, or at least not in Toyota. And I heard in Nishio it's too windy. It just blows off. So it's very difficult to do
Yeah.
that in Nishio, I've heard.
And Wazuka too.
And Wazuka. But
Yeah.
I think some people there are some people doing it in Wazuka, but I think apparently it's difficult. But sourcing rice straw that's free of pesticides and free of crap, basically, is very difficult when you're
Yeah.
putting it over tea. We've heard.
We also learned that one very interesting fact about Hongzu and also like rice straw is that it really helps maintain the humidity or moisture content within the tea garden. So we kind of see that, being laid out on the ground all the time to protect the root system and also the moisture content in the soil. But when it's elevated as Tana, it also kind of contains the moisture in the air too. So it really helps to regulate the microclimate in the garden.
And apparently for Samidori, Sami, Samidori, it is very important for quality. So what this one farmer does, it's so unique. We've never heard of it. We've never seen it until 2 days ago. Is that they have a sprinkler system, like a literal sprinkler system like you'd have indoor for fire prevention,
Mm.
to mist kind of the Samidori to mimic the moisture in the air that you would get over Hanzu, which
Yeah.
was really interesting technique I'd never heard of.
And there's another interesting kind of feature about that practice is that apparently some of the fertilizers will leave some minerals on the surface of the leaf that will kind of taste bitter. And this sprinkler system will flush all of the mineral away.
Yeah, giving it a light car wash.
Yeah, kind of like that. And apparently makes the tea taste better.
So in Toyota, most of the soil is clay type soil, which means that the fertilizer retention is very high, but that comes at the expense of drainage. You have higher, I mean, it makes sense, right? If you have a denser sponge, you're going to hold the fertilizer there longer, but you're removing less moisture. So they have a gigantic channel at the end of the tea garden. I think it's like 3 meters deep or something. That helps with, it's like a normal agricultural or like flood drain channel to help with drainage.
And inside, underneath the tea garden, they buried a number of pipes to increase the drainage. And all of the pipes will like funnel all the way to the channel at the end to kind of increase the soil's drainage capability.
Another thing that this farmer does that's very unique from an infrastructure point of view is three-layer shading. I've heard of triple shading with Suji-san,
Hmm.
but I've never actually heard of triple shading using a white tana. So they use one white tana and two black tanas. And when they're pulled back, it makes for a very interesting, like, checkerboard picture because some of the tea was already picked by the time we got there. So they pulled them back a bit and it looks really cool. But I actually don't know why specifically they needed a white one. But when you do the math of how much everything's getting covered, when you have all three at once, it's about 99% light coverage.
I think
So the history of tea in Toyota is interesting. It actually started back in the Edo period, and it wasn't until Meiji that the Edo era monopoly on shaded cultivation broke, where other producers started to make tencha. So supposedly the first tencha producers and matcha producers in Toyota Aichi were just after Meiji. But today, I think there's very, very few. I think it's less than a dozen tencha producers here in Toyota. Maybe even less than five, if I remember correctly.
my note says there are only two.
Oh, only
I mean,
two.
yeah,
There we
it's
go.
used to be 700.
700
Tea
Oh,
farmers.
tea farmers.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But now there are only two.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Only two left doing tencha.
Yeah. And actually, what's very interesting is that back in the days, most of these teas were machine harvest because there were just so many productions. But now people can actually do hand picking because there's so little tea left. It's one interesting, side effect of this shrinkage, which, for better or worse reason, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Certainly makes for some very delicious tea. All this Tezumi tea, but certainly is also backbreaking labor. It must be very hard to coordinate. This is a problem in all hand-picked tea producing countries actually, but it's especially bad in Japan. It's not very pleasant work. Very few young people want to do it. Everyone who's do it is older. You have to have a lot of free time. But the people that do it are very effective.
Yeah, very skilled.
So on average, our group today picked about 1.5 kgs of wet leaf in 5 hours. Yesterday, 85-year-old grandpa picked
7
seven
kg in the afternoon.
in the same amount of time. He was, what is that, 4 times faster than us, which is a crazy thought. Good for him.
Good for him. Good for uncle. But he's also like 85. And this is really a dying art.
So if you do drink true Tezumi tea, you should really savor that cup.
Yeah.
And anyone, there's also, this really bothers me. There's a lot of mislabeling. There's a really prominent UK matcha brand, probably everyone's heard of, and they have what I'll certainly is fake Uji matcha. And like on the back, it has all the buzzwords, hand picked from the hills, just off of Uji, blah, blah, blah. And, it costs like £12 for a 30-gram bag.
Bullshit.
Like, we should not be abusing this. I've even seen it at a pretty prominent cafe in Hong Kong too, where, they have this whole diagram on the board and say that all their matcha is handpicked, and at the price that they're serving it at, the likelihood that that's true, that they're using that for their matcha latte is almost zero. And anyone counting these little walking harvester machines where someone's on each side of the row is handpicked, that's
Mm.
ridiculous.
Maybe the matcha latte is handpicked on the counter to you.
Or maybe they handpicked it by hand selecting that matcha. They point, "That's the one that I
Okay,
want."
okay. Consumer handpicked.
Handpicked. No, or the barista or something, whoever's
Okay, okay.
creating these recipes. This term really shouldn't be abused.
That's right.
So there's also a lot of talk about using fertilizer. So this is a very organic farm, focusing much more on organic fertilizers in long term. They don't use any synthetic fertilizer here, and actually all of their tencha is EU exportable. And for the deliciousness, it is really like cream of the crop when it comes to EU exportable low pesticide residue matcha. And one of the things is in the summer, they try to use very calcium rich fertilizers, including fish meal and even meat meal, like the bones that come
Mm.
from meat waste products. And they have a custom fertilizer recipe that they use and work with.
Yeah, that was very interesting because all of these farmers, they work with their local fertilizer company to do custom blending. And the companies will really have a track record of your, past blending history, and they will work with you depending on what kind of tea you're growing and also the weather this year.
And they also apply it at different times, and they kind of calibrate it because there's different degradation rates or different decomposition rates of some of these fertilizer materials.
Mm.
So you don't just apply everything all at once. I mean, you have to be careful about some dosage. So like rapeseed cakes, pressings in particular produce a lot of gas, which damage the roots. And we know that's a problem with some other fertilizers that we covered on our episode with Suji-san, what's called next level specialty. But here we were also learning same problem. It really is. You're like a chef almost. You're like a
Yeah.
personal chef
Uh,
in terms of applying fertilizer to the plants.
Yeah, and the method that they used to cope with that is that they applied rapeseed during spring when tea plants have the best kind of growth at the time to kind of overcome this burn.
Yeah, they need to be strong.
Yeah.
Shaded cultivation is very difficult on plants. You're starving them of light, which is something that they need to live. You can't indefinitely shade a plant,
Mm.
so you need to have really strong, hardy plants to put up with this type of thing. So it's actually maybe a better analogy is it's not a personal chef. It's more like a personal dietitian, right? Because you
Yeah.
really have to
Well,
think about the long term health of
it's
the plants
a
too.
bodybuilder coach.
Yeah, bodybuilding coach. Well, maybe Suji-san's a bodybuilding coach,
Uh-huh.
and this farmer is the longevity coach. Because we know Suji-san's tea trees only live to about 20 or 25, and then he replaces them. But it's just difference in philosophy, really. Just two very different methods. So this farmer in particular doesn't submit anything to competition that's not commercially available. Where a lot of farmers, especially in the class of Suji-san, create competition products that are really not commercially available. Or if they are, it's incredibly small quantities.
Mm.
And where this farmer only submits what he actually sells to the competition. He doesn't have a special quote unquote competition grade. And it's just different philosophy. It's pretty interesting actually seeing the differences between this farmer and Tsuji-san and what they're optimizing for and how they optimize for that.
And the outcome of the
Yeah,
optimization.
and the outcome. And,
Mm.
both are delicious. I mean, Suji-san's definitely more rich and umami, just like with classical Japanese sense of quality. But this matcha is really good still. Like the umami is a little less, but there's a lot of complexity that he actually introduces in other ways.
Mm.
And the most unique thing about this, I don't know if anyone else is doing it in Japan, is that he withers his tencha. So after harvest, it actually goes into a cold space where it's humidity controlled and it cold withers overnight, which is extremely unusual for green tea processing for tencha. You do hear about this in Taiwan. There's a lot of Taiwanese high mountain oolong like gaoshencha. Those leaves, after they're picked, they go straight into a cold space where the humidity is controlled, typically like a gigantic refrigerator, essentially, to keep them super green, to suck out just enough moisture, but not too much to sit and to wither. And it gives it this really interesting fragrance. So his tencha, his matcha, has this, what I keep referring to as a baozhong note. A baozhong is a very, 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 very green style of oolong produced in the north of Taiwan. When you taste that baozhong note, and if you've never had this, I really recommend you go to a vendor like Taiwanese Tea Crafts or Stefan Erler or Eco Cha and try a Taiwanese baozhong just to get that reference note. But they have this wonderful, it's kind of floral and sweet and very distinctive and adds this complexity that it's really hard to come by in matcha, which is something very unique to this particular producer, which is exciting to see.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like not a traditional method,
yeah. I mean, traditionally, actually, this will consider as a flaw
probably.
for a lot of these more traditional grading systems. But for producers, here it's innovation, and for consumers, this is wonderful and unique experience.
Creative agency and really create something that tastes very different. And then they have a red brick tencha style oven, which radiates a lot of heat, as we felt earlier. It has 5 different layers of conveyor belts. And as it goes down, the temperature kind of descends. So the first toast as it goes across the first layer, I have it written down somewhere here.
It was 167 degrees.
Ah, there we go.
And the second layer goes down to 110.
There we go.
Mhm.
And they also have these little vents at the top where they can let some
Release
of
the
the moisture
moisture.
so it doesn't get a second steaming.
Yeah, which we painfully found about in our little Chimen or Kimwon tencha experience. We're using some of these Chinese roaster to try
Yeah.
to roast tencha. It
Ended up
just
just being
traps so much moisture inside. Ends up being kind of like a second steam.
we also learned a lot more about steaming and how steaming gets controlled. So essentially, this gigantic tube tumbler, continuous tumbler that the tea falls through, you can actually adjust the angle, which I didn't realize, which totally affects how quickly the tea moves through it. So if it's more flat, it moves much more slowly. And if it's a more vertical angle, the tea will go through much faster.
Yeah.
And you can also control the steam and the airflow that's going through
Mm.
it.
It's very important because different cultivar actually needs different steaming time. And for kind of like tougher, more fibrous cultivar like Asatsuyu, it needs about 25 seconds. And for more delicate cultivars like Asahi, usually people will do under 20 seconds of steaming.
So we got to try some fresh steamed leaves coming right out of the steamer, and I was just taken back. It was Asatsuyu cultivar, and it was like taking a piece of like blanched spinach out. It has about this texture. It's very tender and soft, and
But
it
it doesn't
has,
have the spinach flavor,
yeah, no spinach flavor, but
mm,
the same like
texture.
mushiness kind of
Mm.
texture. Maybe it's a little more put together. The umami was just striking. There was a slight bitterness, and then wow, the aftertaste. The aftertaste was so sweet and umami and lingering in a way that was kind of surprised when you're eating something that's like a green leafy vegetable like thing that would normally be like in food, like where you would encounter a warm, steamed, tender, leafy vegetable, which was really cool.
So after the steaming, the leaves gets blowed into kind of what we call a butterfly net kind of container, and the tumbler fan, kind of blows away all of the moisture from the surface of the leaf, and then it gets sent into the tencha oven, which the tencha gets roasted for 5 layers, and then it gets really, really, really crisp. And it was there that the tencha would turn to below like 5% moisture.
And it's almost like a potato chip. So we got to try some, and there was a little bit of mispicking on our first day. So they separated out some mature leaves that kind of made it through the process for bancha. But it was a really interesting comparison. We picked asahi yesterday, and we got to try proper young, tender leaf asahi. And then through the same process, we got to try older, mature leaves,
Ah,
which should not have been picked and were saved for bancha after having gone through that tencha processing. So they were technically ara tencha
mm.
or aracha or crude tencha before the destemming and deveining process. Wow. The taste difference between a young tender leaf and its umami-ness and the mature leaves, the pancha leaves, was like they're not even the same product. And actually, Yusuke-san, when we were picking tea today, was talking about Asahi cultivar. Someone who's in the tea picking group was complaining that they recently had an Asahi that didn't taste any good, and they're like, "Oh, I thought this was a good cultivar. Why wasn't my Asahi sample good that I bought from I forget which tea house in Bangkok?" And he's like, "Yeah, you know what? Asahi actually doesn't taste very good inherently, but Asahi is really good at absorbing fertilizer."
Yeah.
And it is like an art and a science. It's like, I don't know, cooking with something like tofu, right? Tofu can just be incredibly bland, but if you really know how to cook it and add flavor to it, it's
Ah,
like a
that's a
canvas to paint on top of.
gray analogy. Or maybe like a spongy tofu.
A spongy tofu.
Absorb all of the flavor from, whatever the sauce you end up adding into it. So the reason why Asahi is so good at absorbing fertilizer is that its root doesn't go down to the ground. It spreads, and it spreads very shallowly. So it's kind of like a white net that the tea plant cast onto the soil to kind of trap as much fertilizer as possible.
Apparently, there's some rooting problems too because it does that, but it makes it particularly well suited for shaded cultivation. And naturally high levels of umami when it is and amino acids when it is properly fertilized. Where apparently other cultivars like uji hikari, Yusuke-san was saying, are inherently just taste better. Like
Mm.
decent fertilizer, no fertilizer, a lot of fertilizer, like still tastes better than Asahi does
I
when it's not
believe that.
fertilized.
I
I,
believe that. I
I,
mean, we tried some of the unfertilized organic Asahi.
and it
Did not,
wasn't very good.
it did not taste like, the Asahi we remember.
Like has a fancy name and a very fancy price tag. Doesn't taste very good. So that was interesting to learn. And wow, these fresh Asahi chips that come out, they're crunchy and they're blast of umami, and then it turns into creaminess and complexity and the aftertaste. Really, the most unbelievable thing was the potency and the clarity of the aftertaste. And then right afterwards, we got to try another one through the same process that had been recently picked Sayamidori and tasting the Sayamidori tencha aracha chip next to the Asahi tencha chip. Wow. I honestly think the flavor difference is more magnified at that stage when you're just chewing on these freshly processed leaves than they do in the cup. And Paul was telling me that Sayamidori, like his favorite tasting note to identify it blindly was edamame.
Mame.
And
Mm.
what I tasted that was like, whoa,
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
just it clicked. There we go.
Mhm.
I get it. This is the edamame that Paul was talking about.
Very cool. And this is Sae Midori, right?
Siam Midori. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Ye.
Saemi. Siam Midori. Not to be confused with Samidori, which I somehow confuse more often than I should. At the beginning of my matcha journey, actually thought they were the same, just different romanization.
They are confusing,
Uh,
but the kanji is very different.
well, can't read that.
So Ryan, we have picked tea in Uji as well before. How is the picking tea experience different here than
Yeah.
Uji?
So there's different picking methods when you pick tea. So the method that we did in Uji and here, what they have in common is so before this harvest, they cut the top bud at some point, probably the very beginning of shading or right before shading. Excuse me, I actually don't quite remember when they do that. But when the first bud appears on the top, it's the apical meristem. And when you cut that off, it sends a hormone down the rest of the plant and
Mm.
tells new buds to grow. And that means that for basically every mature leaf that you have working down the branch, shoots out another one. So you have all of these little shoots that shoot off. So you pull a branch towards you, you work from the bottom, and you have a mature leaf, and nestled next to that mature leaf, you have a new young leaf, and then you pick that young leaf. So you work your way up, and maybe for each branch, you have, I don't know, 8 to 10 different alternating nodes to pick from. And the higher you get, the more mature, the more longer that new growth is. So when we were picking tea in Gokasho, you actually just pick off the whole thing.
Mm.
So if there's a new leaf cluster, you pick off the stem and you put the stem and the leaf in the basket. This picking style that we're doing here, which has a name which we're going to look up now and Sam can tell you, because I can't pronounce anything Japanese, is where you pull and kind of, it's not quite rip, but you leave that soft young stem behind and you're just pulling the leaves out. So it's as if you were picking one leaf by one leaf, but for some of these, it'd just be way too slow to do that and too difficult. So you'd basically pinch down and you pull up and you get, it's like, that's the best sound effect I can do to describe what that does. I think most people can picture that, I hope. And at the end, you have a sort of cluster of leaves that you then toss into your basket with no stem.
Just picture when you're trying to use your three fingers to strip all of the grapes off from a very thinned grapevine, and that's kind of similar to how you would do it for all these young tea leaves. So the picking method for this kind of practice is called shigokizumi, and apparently it's not only in Aichi but also in Shiga in Mandukoro. They use this type of picking method as well.
And I've seen some videos of some people in Uji as well. For certain cultivars, will choose this method over the other one, which actually I don't know the name of, called normal picking, at least to us. Or you take the stem with you.
But the other picking that we did in Uji end up, you end up getting a lot of stems, which will naturally be turned into hojicha or cookie hoji
Yeah.
by the end of the day.
So in this case, there's less hojicha
Mm.
by the end of the day, which is so. Sam, which picking method do you prefer?
Do I prefer? Interesting question. I don't know if I have a preference, but for so many hours, your fingertip do end up getting a little bit painful for shikokizumi.
Yeah, there's a lot
And
more like rubbing when
yeah.
you're like trying not to damage the leaves, but also trying to remove the leaves from the soft stem, which is a difficult game in putting just enough pressure, but not enough pressure to break the soft stem.
Mm.
Because if you break the soft stem, then you gotta take off each grape one by one, so to speak, each leaf one by one, which
Yeah.
ends up really, you waste a lot of time that way.
Yeah, I also like for this method really requires a lot of like surface friction of your finger to the tea leaf to kind of strip the tea leaf off. And it's very difficult to do it with naked hand. Here, they actually give you these special gloves that has a unique surface texture that help you to strip the tea leaf faster. But Ryan seemed to be not in the liking of using those
No, I
gloves.
hate those gloves. They're too there's too much, like, traction, and I end up picking too many mature leaves, and so then
Yeah,
I have to
it's very hard to feel the actual
yeah,
texture of the
you
tea leaf.
miss the sensory-ness at your
Uh-huh.
fingertips. I spent 2 months in India, studying food and beverage preferences, across North, East, South, and West in different parts of India, and we had a sort of a local guide, met each person who helped identify the food and beverage and flavor combinations we needed to do in each particular region. And there's this very nice old lady named, Jayanti, and Jayanti was like, look, something you have to understand that in India, the sensory experience of eating food starts at the fingers, not at the mouth. And I will never forget that. And it was
Uh,
kind of echoing in my head when I decided to take these gloves off. It's like, oh, I need to actually, because you can feel the difference. You can
oh,
hear the
yeah,
difference. You
yeah.
can feel the difference in texture and in sound and in waxiness.
Mm.
I don't know how smooth they are or how moist they are, and losing that little tiny bit of sensory perception
Makes all the
was
difference.
really
Yeah.
difficult in picking the difference between picking tea fast and picking tea well.
Yeah, I mean, I've been always picking tea with my naked hand, in China, in Korea, and also in Japan in the past, like in Wuji. We didn't use glove. But here, I try to do it, but, over some certain time, your fingertips really start hurting. So I decided to wear one glove on one hand to do the stripping and use the other hand to kind of check the textures.
So we also got to see a milling facility. I think they had 16 Ishiusu, not all of which were actively being used. And we had a chance to really ask some questions. This is a very unique producer that does everything from like the agriculture all the way through retail sales. They have a little store. And in the room, we're obviously working on our matcha mill to mill matcha fresh anywhere and everywhere with an active cooling system, swappable millstones, anti-static technology. Not that I have this down to a 30-second elevator pitch, but it gave us some good opportunity to learn just some milling knowledge. And so I asked him, what's your target temperature? Like, what's the temperature range of the outer part of the stone that you consider generally acceptable? And he said 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. But he says at the interface where the stones are actually touching each other, they're probably even hotter, like probably closer to 60 degrees Celsius, which is the same thing that I heard from one of the Ishiusu operators in Paris, who's getting recommendations from a producer in Ujitawara about the recommended milling temperature being about 60 degrees Celsius as sort of a ceiling. Another interesting thing that he does is that he refinishes the tencha before grinding to remove any excess moisture content. And I took down some notes here. What he does is he gives it another quick toast. I didn't have how long the duration was, but he does not let it exceed 100 degrees Celsius. Otherwise, he believes it imparts too much flavor change into the tencha. So to drive off that final moisture content before he decides to mill, he does a little bit of refinishing, but at much lower temperatures.
And the goal is to control the moisture content to about like 3%, which is very dry.
Which is, yeah, very dry. The other thing that he mentioned is, and this is something we've heard from a couple people now, is actually the importance of some heat in milling. Without a lot of heat in milling, you have flavors that become much less more muted and much less interesting. And he was talking about how that was actually pretty important to create a balanced profile. And I was asking him, if you're milling tea for 24 hours and you were to scoop tea at the bottom of the pile, like in theory, tea that was milled in the first hour, and if you were to scoop tea on the top, which was just, milled on a stone that had been turning for 24 hours and theoretically much hotter. In theory, reach some temperature equilibrium probably, but maybe it still slowly exceeds. But you still have some material coming out of it that was in a colder Ishiusu than some of the later material. So you're actually kind of creating a blend. He was like, yeah, the top bit is a little bit more astringent, but he thinks when it's blended all together, it actually can bring some structure. And that he actually wants to see some of that astringency as well as some of the he didn't use the word hika, and I forget what the word he used was, but this milling aroma that comes with that heat. And he says that the milling aroma, this I'll call it milling hika with lack of a better word, or a roasted smell dissipates within 1 month after milling. So everything that he mills is ground to order and ideally is consumed within 1 month. And apparently the hika that is made from tencha processing in the tencha oven lasts much longer. So you have different degradation rates for these different types of fired aromas. So he recommends consuming tea within 1 month after milling to preserve this sort of double layer of complexity. Hika. Were there any other surprises to you, Zongjun, in the milling room? We went in two different groups because it was too small of a room. Were you surprised, or what struck you, or were there any other interesting questions that people in your group asked?
Yeah, so the other very interesting thing that we saw is that they use these wooden box to kind of collect out of the milled matcha, and also tencha before milling. So they all contained in this very uniquely designed little wooden box that is tin plated inside. And this special wood that they use is called tsuki, and it also has kind of like it's a local wood in Japan that people use for various functionalities. But people especially like it because it has kind of like a insect repellent feature that people not only store food inside tsuki made containers, but also clothes.
Prevent the moths.
Yeah, prevent the moths.
Original
Uh,
mothball
mm,
box.
yeah, so but it's fairly odorless, so people really like using this type of wood. And we also saw a lot of these tsuki trees in Wazuka. These like they really looks like forest giants.
Mm.
Very magnificent trees.
The other thing that really struck me was just how much matcha was everywhere. Everywhere. Every surface, the matcha was everywhere. When you're milling matcha, when you're making matcha, it forms a suspension in water. After you mill it, it is definitely forming a suspension in air. There was
Yes.
matcha all over the floor. The floor is literally green.
Yeah, it's green.
Like half of the surfaces are green. If you look up at the air conditioning filter, it's horrifying. And then if you think, what is this doing to my lungs? If you're not wearing a mask,
Mm.
it's actually a pretty big hazard from an air quality perspective. So we recommend anyone milling matcha, just in general, keep that in mind. Within our machine, we made it kind of airtight. There's very little, there's only basically one way for matcha to come out that falls into a collector that we built a special magnetic cup that goes up into it so that like it's not being really exposed to the air. Otherwise, you definitely will notice this in the air quality. So actually, if you're comparing our mill against an ishi, I'd actually say that's one area where we have a heads up because it much better contains the air surrounding the milling surface to prevent that. And anyone who does mill on an ishi, really recommend you get a box and you close it because chronic exposure to this type of dust is extremely unhealthy.
The other interesting thing that we kind of already heard from other tea millers is that you sieve matcha after milling. This farmer also sieves his matcha, and pre-sieved matcha looks very interesting. It's very fluffy, contains a lot of these kind of hair like texture in the powder, and also you see some tencha too. So we kind of
It's naturally a messy process.
yeah, it's naturally a messy process.
You get a
We,
little tencha here, a little tencha there, some
and
partially milled powder when because you have to kind of prime the plates before you get everything moving.
yeah, it's this is actually quite encouraging to see because we saw this a lot when we were developing our mill.
This is very validating across the board, even across the optimal temperature ranges, and that we're hitting right in the window and respecting the ceiling at most of the speeds coming from our mill. You can definitely push it hot if you really are running it very fast for an extremely long time. But it's still, within an acceptable range for the most part from all of these different numbers that we've heard floating around. So last and perhaps most importantly, Zongjun, what did you think of the tea? And we got to try matcha at their factory. Fresh ground, ready to go, having picked it, having seen it end to end. And what were your thoughts on that usacha?
It was very good. It was very interesting. If you would have let me guess, I would totally guess this matcha is a traditional, conventional farmed matcha. Has this very full body, rich umami flavor that, you know, has this wonderful hint of, as you previously mentioned, edamame. So this matcha was a blend. In fact, this farmer only does blend matcha. And it was really until this year that per Koto Tea Space special request, they first times we're going to do a single cultivar, single origin matcha. But for a blend matcha using basically organic farming, that was some very incredible taste.
Yeah, with this very interesting sort of withered fragrance. Makes it super unique. And something that occurred to me today, we were getting a tour of the tencha processing facility, which is in an old miso factory. And a large part of it is actually made out of wood. And you see these giant timber beams. And the building is about 100 years old. And the farmer who, it's harvest season. I don't want to say he looked tired because I feel like that's an insult, but the guy definitely has been working a lot. Was standing there and he was talking about earthquake proofing the building. And that he's wanted to make sure that it was structurally sound in case of an earthquake. And I was looking at him and thinking about this, and I was like, wow, I really understand now why most matcha and tencha producers are end to end from agriculture through retail sales. This guy has to think about all of the hiring, skilled tea picker, people to work in the tencha processing factory. He has to think about all of this land and probably all of the regulations and the paperwork, just owning and maintaining the land, all of these buildings, making sure that they're earthquake proof. He has to do all the B2B sales. He had all the retail sales that they have there, blending the products. And also, they have basically a second factory where they're doing the shiage and the milling, which also needs to be monitored by people. And then you have to take care of all the tea plants. And then you need to make sure that all of your tea sells. Like, I just even talking about it feels exhausting. I probably only mentioned like 60% of the list. Like, who knows what else that guy has to think about? And like the ability to context switch, the money to solve the problems, the expertise to solve the problems, not even to mention the time that it takes to solve those problems. I was looking at Sam as we were leaving today, and it was like, I understand why some people just sell to wholesalers. He is a farmer. He's a factory owner and processor, and he's a brand, right? And like so much mad respect. Like if you think about all of us who are in the matcha industry, they're sourcing material and selling it. Just imagine being the factory that made it and the farmers who grew it, right? Like that would increase the scope of work by just a huge percent because even just selling the product is hard. I'm selling it B2B, selling it to consumer. So it's pretty crazy. You think of these tea farmers as these artists who are sitting around thinking about their plants all day and the type of fertilizer that they put in the ground, and making sure that everything is shaded perfectly. And like, it's exactly 21 days or it's exactly 30 days. And he picks the perfect optimal time window to pick the tea right when it's ready. But really, what I realized is that this is just a game of compromises and constraints, right? Like, how much tea, how many tea pickers do we have? How quickly are these coming in? Apparently, it's an early year here in Aichi, and it's just one big set of compromises. The level of intentionality and control that tea farmers have over the outcome is very low. And there's so many unpredictable factors from weather, from how many people you have to when the tea actually comes in, and then all of the other factors that can pop up as it goes from, a plant in the dirt, in the ground, all the way into your final cup. Even things like the new Iran war and what that's doing to fertilizer prices, right? This doesn't affect our farmer because this doesn't affect the farmer that we visited here because he only uses organic fertilizer. I guess maybe it does indirectly. But for the people using synthetic fertilizer, like because of the Iran war, that's causing a huge bottleneck in supply. Probably going to increase a lot of fertilizer prices, and make the raw inputs even more expensive. So there's all these exogenous factors that play a non-negligible role on the difficulty in the work that these farmers are actually doing. Which goes back to the point that we've been making about uji and uji matcha and saying that, a can of matcha tastes good just because it says uji on it. It's not actually crediting the people who actually did the work to make it good. Like, yes, this farmer, he's not even part of the four prefecture trademark zone, but he and the tea pickers and the whole company and his wife and his family members, they're the reason why this tea is so good. It's not because he inherited the skill from this person or that person and is part of some great lineage. I mean, we all stand on the shoulders of giants in whatever our respective fields are. It's good because he put in the work and the blood, sweat, and tears. And having these very reductive approaches, ceremonial grade, uji matcha, whatever, really doesn't put credit to the right place to describe and define an attribute what makes a good product premium or good.
Well said, Ryan. Well said. It's this work is really about like sweat and tears and hard works. And when people talking about why these farmers don't opt into single origin, why don't they promote themselves more? um like it by the end of the day really just kind of ran out your energy of thinking about other things. Like this is a lot of dimensions that people need to consider. And for the farming, for the cultivation, for the picking, for the manufacturing, for the packaging, every single segment on this value chain, they lack labor. There's really visible shortage of labor and a very visible aging of labor in all of these segments. I honestly feel a little bit concerned. Like, what if, we don't have our 85-year-old grandpa in the future to pick so many teas so fast? And we were just looking around the tea fields when we were picking tea. We barely finished like one row yesterday, and we barely finished half of a row today because we had less time, and there were just so much unpicked tea around us.
Very like intimidating or
Yeah.
scary. I don't know.
Yeah, and honestly, when we were picking some teas, some of the younger leaves are getting a little bit hard. And that's definitely not because of, the lack of farmers' care. It's definitely because, we don't have enough manpower to pick them timely. And that's very sad. All of these timings in the past, before the harvest season, they did their job, they did their hard work. And it was just that we don't have enough people to pick the final product, that these product ends up deteriorating in the field. It's incredibly sad.
This is like, it's almost like jazz or really good jazz session where like every single person is improvising. And perhaps once in a while, you just have this magic chemistry between a group of musicians and a group of artists that creates something so perfect because everything is just in sync and coordinated and paced and the cadence is perfect. It's very similar like with the weather, with the tea pickers, if you have enough labor when things are ready. Just so many things have to go right to create like those years where they say this is a fantastic product.
Yeah, Ichigo Ishie.
Exactly.
When you do have the luck to end up trying a product like that, please cherish. We should all cherish.
Yeah. And I think we should be a little bit easier on producers. It's easy to be critical of, any this, that, or the other factor that, might cause a tea to taste better or worse. And truly understanding and attributing what makes tea taste good and why that flavor tastes good is just a very difficult thing to do.
There's really no lazy farmer and bad tea. There's lazy farmer and no tea. Like if there's ever tea end up producing that day, it's hardworking farmers and hardworking jobs.
Yeah. And it also feels like this is honestly having experienced it and seen it, you can feel the lack of sustainability. It doesn't feel like I really can't wait to contrast this someday when we make it to Kagoshima with these auto harvesters where there's literally not a single human hand touching the tea. Here, this tea gets touched so many times in this process. It's crazy.
Hmm.
It gets picked and then it gets moved from bag to bag. It gets withered and then it gets moved again. It gets steamed. They have people checking every leaf in the tencha oven when it comes out to either separate the leaves or remove some of the older leaves. And then it gets sorted out. This is the level of care and intentionality on almost a leaf by leaf basis. And the number of human eyeballs that see and inspect and make a judgment call on each leaf is a little blowing, and you're removing some of that soul in like these completely automated factories. It reminds me, in China they have these, they call them dark factories, right? Where they don't even need to turn the lights on because
Oh,
they're
yeah.
totally automated.
In Shenzhen.
You don't even need any people to
Yeah.
be there.
all of these electronics factories.
It's
Mm.
future of manufacturing of you walk in, not a soul there, right? Like, you can feel that that's coming to tea farming. You feel that it needs to come to tea farming.
It has to, otherwise there will be no tea.
And the people that continue to do this are really like heroes of saving culture.
Mm.
And, even us, we're complaining that there's these weird incentive loops in Japan about making better tea for the competition or making better tea for what old men think are good because they're the chashis, they're the wholesale buyers that are buying and selling this material around Japan. And like, why isn't there more innovation? Why aren't there more innovation cycles? Why don't people experiment more? Like, these people can barely get the product out the door at like a reasonable profit. Even some of the rock star matcha farmers that we've talked about on this podcast, we've heard, it's not like they are earning rock star money and that actually cash flow is a huge problem. Even during this matcha boom, it is a difficult business when you decide to get into three businesses instead of one. So it's really hard to think about like, what does that future look like? Like, are these dark factories good? Are they still technically producing high quality matcha? This obviously needs to be preserved, but it feels like it almost can't be very commercial because, like, who is going to come pick the tea?
Mm.
Who is going to take on the reins? And, like, if you do all this work and the tea that comes out of the dark factory is good enough for most of the tea that most of the matcha that's being prepared and drinked in the world, then, like, who is this for? And I think it's for this community. It's for specialty people. It's for people who care about where the food came from,
Mm.
people who don't mind paying double the price for a hand-picked product. It's the specialty food movement, specialty matcha movement.
Yeah, it's when it comes to terroir, I think especially so for matcha, it's really not about a geographic region. It's about the people that lives in those area, and it's about all of these human interventions, human decisions that end up going into all these products that created this unique flavor profile. It's about people. You're literally tasting people's wisdom, people's hard work, and people's life.
Yeah. And this whole industry is not going to be kept alive unless it's able to grow outside of Japan. And even so, there's going to be a lot of loss in culture and lower productivity for these slower methods.
Well, hopefully there will be new culture being created.
New culture being created, this culture being preserved in a larger market
Mm.
to incentivize more people to flood the zone with some money to keep this good work alive. And it does create just a product with the soul and with a story. And so that's what we're hoping for, especially into the future. It's hard to know what's going to happen, but this was really interesting to put into context when thinking about like traditional practices versus innovation, which is a tension we love to
Mm.
explore here.
And tomorrow we will go back to the tea field and we will try to do our part to add value and we will try to learn more.
Yes, we will. So thanks so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this, please consider sharing with a friend. And we'll see you on the next one.
See you in the future.